Okay, good day. Today we're back working on the ZAU. I just wanted to take you through some of the progress that I've made and some of the things that I've learned. So let's jump into it. All right, so I got the hydraulic hoses all run for the cylinder. They were 8-foot hoses. I did get some newer style 90-degree elbows. I know they're not the right ones, but they're what we're going to use for this. And then I built a bracket for the hoses that just has a tension spring that wraps around the extension tube to the carburetor, and that just kind of holds that in place. And then they both stack into that that clip, and they both stack into, so you can see it, that clip. And then they come back around and they thread into the block from the original hydraulic lines. It's coming along. Okay, our next step is to make some of these plates that I do not have, the lifting roller arm and then the lifting roller arm hammer strap. So I already have one of the roller arms mocked up with cardboard, and you can see it's got a pretty snug fit in there. So when we get the steel one in there, it's gonna sit in like that and get held in with one bolt. So then we've got the two of them drawn out on a piece of steel, and I'm just gonna use a grinder and cut them out. So that came out pretty close. Now I just have to drill the hole, and we can also walk in here and take a look. And get a nice flush fit over that back side. So we're good there. Now I gotta find a hole drill. Okay, so you can see I've got the roller lift arm all fabbed out. I've also got the hammer bracket completed and bolted together, and then I've got the arm that runs up to the cultivator pinned in like it should be, and that's what that whole thing looks like. Then the other thing that I found in the manual is that the lift arm for the spring rake that drags behind, the lift rod swivel, which is this guy right here, gets bolted on through this bracket, and I will show you the purpose of that in a few minutes. So I did bring the spring rake up, and I have it sitting here, and I started to take the components off, and so what this should look like then is this over here, where this 1/2-inch rod runs up through the center of it, and then this crank, the end of the rod is threaded, this crank goes on the end, and then that's what you would use to adjust your height. As I started to put this together, I realized that I've got a couple of issues. First issue is that the lift rod for this side is stuck. So that is seized on there really tight. Those threads are all massacred. And if that was the only issue, I would clean the threads up, and I would grease this thing really well, and I would do everything I could to get this broken loose. However, that's not the only issue. So the second issue is, if I put this in the spring rake where it belongs, and I bring it up to our lift arm, so it looks something like this, you can see that it is about a foot shorter than it should be. The reason for this is this spring rake and cultivator was set up for a U, and on a U, the roller lift sits right underneath the seat here. So it sits about a foot lower than what a Z does. So with that being the case, I opted to order some new 1/2-inch rod. I will thread the end of it, and then I will cut this one off. I'll drill it out and then retap it so that this is still usable, and then I'll discard the bar, and I'll just put new bends and everything. I actually have the bar, but I need the tap and die, and that's coming on Monday. So the other thing that this is missing is, in order to function right, there's supposed to be about an inch spacer between here and here, and that's so that this gets up high enough over the top of that lift arm that you can crank on it. It's meant to set the depth, but it is not meant to actually lift the spring rake, and I'll show you that in a second. So again, if we look in the book, you see our crank handle, which is called the rear gang lifting rod crank, the expansion pipe spacer, and then the lift rod swivel, which is this guy, and then the lift rod itself, which goes from here down to here. Alright, so then we've got spring rake. I had to take the brace that goes from the platform to the drawbar off, because the drawbar has to swing out of the way for this to fit, which I didn't know, but now I do. And I still have one more bracket that I need to make. This is what holds the spring rake to the tractor, so it's two separate brackets. One goes on the back here, and it mounts where the rear fender mounts, and it goes down under the axle, and then another bracket on this side that comes down and joins it right here, and then the spring rake sits right inside with a pin. Issue here is this bolt is tapered, and this isn't the right bolt, so it is a square taper inside, but the other bolt must have been flatter than this, so it doesn't quite fit. So I'm probably just going to take a bolt like this, grind it down, maybe weld it in so that it sits still. But the bigger issue is I don't have either one of these brackets for the other side, so I'm going to have to try to mimic what is here. I bought the steel to do that. This is going to be probably right at the cap of my fabrication skills. I'm going to have to build jigs to make these bends. This is really thick steel to be bending in the first place. So it's going to take pretty much everything that I have to get this figured out and finish it up. I did notice that this bracket looks like it was welded and not bent, which I'll probably end up doing the same thing. I'll just cut it out and weld it so I don't have to try to make that 90 on either one of these. So I have that feat left to do. As far as the rest of the cultivator, I've already had that hanging off the front of the tractor. You've seen that picture at the front of the playlist, so I know that everything fits in those brackets. I know that the support arm that comes down from the front is all good. I have to change out the shovels, but other than that, I won't have too much issue from this point forward. I do the one thing I do have to address is what they call the frame bracket that comes from the cultivator back to the rear axle. The reason that I had to take the tires off and flip them around was to widen them out, because this boss is where that frame bracket needs to get pinned to, and with the tire there I couldn't get that arm close enough to pin it in. So with the tire widened out, the bracket will come in. But then the other thing that I've run into, that I've seen looking at other pictures, is that our belt pulley is not going to work. I can run the cap on the end of the belt pulley drive. I will not be able to put the belt pulley on. I'm going to have to just run the cap, and even with the cap on, that bar comes just within inches of that cap. So belt pulley will get put away, and then if I ever decide to take it off, then I can use it. The other thing that is going to get addressed is the electrical for this is getting pretty weathered, and I need to shorten it anyway. So I'm going to put my cutoff somewhere else and get this all redone. So once I have this bracket and the two lift arms all fabricated and I'm happy with it, then I can start pulling it all apart so that I can paint it, and then we'll get it put back on and get the tires back on, get this thing cleaned up, and that will take care of the actual tractor portion of this. And then we'll get into sandblasting and cleaning up the cultivator and the spring rake itself. I think I now have a clear understanding of how this whole thing operates. So on the cultivator, when this bar gets pulled back, so the cylinder runs all the way out, the roller lift lurches back, pulling this bar back. That drops the holder for the shovels. It doesn't push it down. It doesn't actually use power to push them in the ground. Gravity just pulls them down and pulls them into the ground. It just lets the upward force go. And then same thing with the spring rake. When this comes all the way back, the spring rake goes down to the ground and is allowed to dig in based on how deep you have your adjustment set. Then when you come back up again, right? So the ram pulls all the way in, the arms rotate up, pushes the rod forward. That actually pulls the shovels up out of the ground. And at the same time, it pulls the spring rake up. So that's how the whole thing operates together. And then when you engage this cylinder to the back, right, that's your outward push for the cylinder. So that pushes everything down, and now you're digging, and as you go along, if you should hit a rock and it reverberates back up to the roller lift, and the roller lift gets force against it enough to push back on the ram, then it snaps itself out so that there's no force anymore. If you hit harder or hard enough, it will actually snap it forward and raise everything for you so that you don't damage your shovels. That is my understanding of how this whole thing operates. I'm not sure. I've never actually seen it. I've never even seen a video of it. I'm just piecing together the things that I've noticed and that I've read, and if anybody else can shed any light on it via the comment section, that would be super helpful. But I think for the most part I've got it nailed down. So yeah, that's where we sit today, and when I get a little bit more of this done, I'll bring you back and we'll chat a little bit more. All right, I thank you all for watching. Those of you that have subscribed, I appreciate it. If you haven't yet, please consider doing it. We still have a long ways to go on the Z. We have a long ways to go on the 335, and we have a ton of work to do on the RTE. Should have plenty of videos going up, so stick with it and take your foot off the clutch. Thanks, everybody.